When my mum and dad got divorced, my dad moved into a house a few streets over from me. He wasn't around much growing up, but he's made an active effort over the last couple of years to make up for lost time, so I see him quite regularly. He'd come over to mine for a cup of coffee, and I'd go to his for a beer. He works for a factory that makes cakes en masse, so he'd usually bring over some sweet treats on his way home from work. One day last summer, I got a text from him asking for my address, saying he wanted to send me something that was too big to bring over himself. I thought it was funny that he didn't know where I live, even though he's there all the time, but I have a lot of friends whose house I only know by sight. Like, I know where they live and how to get there, but I couldn't actually tell you their address. I replied with my full address, zip code and everything. Later that day, when he'd finished up at work, he arrived at my house empty-handed. "What, no cakes?" I joked, knowing that something bigger was coming. "Not today," he laughed. He came inside and we had our usual conversation over coffee. He left shortly after, saying my brother Ryan was on his way over to his house to watch the game. I took a shower and settled down for a cozy night in alone. With the TV on in the background, I sat in my pajamas idly scrolling on my phone when a text from my dad came through. "Hey, are you at home?" it read. I was confused about why he'd asked, since it had barely been an hour since he left. I guess it should have been a red flag, but I didn't think it was suspicious at the time. I just replied, "Yeah," and carried on flicking through Facebook. Not long after, my phone started to vibrate with Ryan's name flashing on screen. I picked up. "Hey, it's me," my dad's voice came through the speaker. "I was just seeing if I left my phone at yours before. I can't find it anywhere." I was still confused at this point before the reality of the situation began to sink in. "Didn't you just text asking if I was home?" I asked, praying for the confirmation. And then, the doorbell sounded. I stayed still, staring at the door as my dad began to panic, frantically asking me what I meant and what was going on. I didn't reply. I didn't want to make a sound. I just sat there comatose as the door handle started to rattle. "I'm coming over," my dad assured me before hanging up. Another text instantly came through from my dad's phone. "I'm here, let me in," it read. I listened intently, nervously waiting for signs that whoever was out there was leaving. I heard footsteps on the porch, hoping they'd get quieter, but they didn't. It sounded like they were heading around the side of the house. My heart skipped a beat as I tried to remember if I'd locked the back door. I couldn't take the risk. I darted over to the kitchen, and just as I managed to click the lock into place, I heard someone trying the handle. Behind the thin cloth drape, I could see his outline. I slowly started stepping backwards. His fist came through the window and I screamed. As he felt around for the lock, I ran to the front door. I heard him entering. He rapidly approached as I opened the door to flee. I almost escaped when his meaty hand gripped me by the wrist. I screamed for help, using my free arm to relentlessly slap him across the chest, but he wouldn't let go. It was at this point that my dad and brother arrived. "You son of a bitch," my dad yelled. The two chased the perpetrator, who fled through the back door before jumping over the fence. Turns out my dad knew the guy. They worked together at the factory, which is where he had taken my dad's phone from. We gave the police his details and he was arrested later that night. He's currently locked up as we await the trial, which my lawyers assure me is going to go in our favour since he wasn't smart enough to try and get rid of the phone. Still, I don't think much will come of it. He'll be out soon, and whilst he has been fired from his job, I'm scared that's just going to make him angry and that he'll come back for me. I still tense up every time I hear my phone vibrate. I often wake up to a symphony of bizarre sounds from around the house. It's not a particularly old house, but it's definitely got its signs of wear and tear. I don't think it was built very well. There's a whole host of indications of botched jobs and cowboy builders, which is probably why I got it so cheap on a single person's salary. There's an extension on one side. The previous owners built a garage, which I mostly just use for storage. There is a car in there, but my license was revoked from one too many DUIs, so it just sits gathering dust for the time being. I do hear some clattering going on from there, but every time I've been in to check it out, I can't see anything out of the ordinary. I don't know if you believe in the paranormal. I've always been a firm believer based on other experiences, which I'll talk about another time. But for me, the house creaking as well as things being moved around only strengthened my belief. But then again, I do drink more than I should. One night though, there was a huge bang coming from the kitchen, as if some pots and pans had been knocked off the counter. I snuck down the stairs and into the kitchen where two cupboards were open. The door to one was moving slightly, like there was someone hiding behind it. The drawer with the knives in was on the opposite side of the room, so I'd have to make do with a rolling pin. Clutching it tightly, I crept towards the cupboard and pounced around the door. It was a dog. I checked all the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked and nothing was broken. Everything seemed in order, so I had no idea how it could have gotten in. It was a Springer Spaniel, sitting patiently with an unoccupied stare. So I did what anyone would do in that situation. I fed it hot dogs. After that, she followed me around the house. Boy did she stink. I thought about letting her stay in my room, but the smell was unbearable, so I set up a few cushions in the corner of the kitchen for her. But I'm not sure she took to it. I could hear whimpering all night from the hallway downstairs. The next morning, I took her to the vet to get checked out and see if she had a chip. There was no collar and no chip, so it looked like I'd be keeping her. On the way home, I picked up all the usual stuff: a bed, some food, and more toys than I ever had. Obviously, I posted pictures on Facebook in case anyone was missing her, but she was so skinny that I thought she must have been a stray. I named her Stone Cold Steve Austin, and you can't tell me that's not the best dog name in the world. She had the attitude for it. Every day when I came home from work, the house would be a mess. Food spilled on the floor, things being moved. I'd only taken her for short walks around the block at this point, but one particular day, I grabbed a couple of beers and took her to the dog park. She ran over the fields like she'd been in captivity and was finally free. It was hard to get her to come back. She wasn't used to her new name, and neither was anyone else in the park. I got some strange looks shouting Stone Cold, but that was probably due to the accent I said it in. Eventually, after rumbling with some squirrels, she came back and we went home. Arriving back, the house was in a cluttered state. Things moved around or missing and the cupboards open. I could have sworn that it wasn't a mess when we left, but like I said, I'm a believer, so I did wrestle with the thought of a poltergeist. I woke up again to Austin barking from downstairs. I got out of bed to check on her. She was in the hallway again, staring at the door to the closet. Is that where the ghost lives? I thought. I opened the door, but as you'd expect, there was nothing in it other than a few coats and my vacuum cleaner. I sat with Austin for a while, making sure she went to sleep before I went back to bed. The next morning, she was nowhere to be seen. I looked all over the house but couldn't find her anywhere. I started to hear the muffled sound of a radio. It sounded like it was coming from the closet. Opening it, the sound got louder, but again there was nothing in there. That's when I noticed the slither of light in the corner of the back wall of the closet. I pushed on the wall, and to my horror, it came loose. I moved the panel to one side, revealing the interior of my garage. The radio stopped, filling the air with an eerie silence. Austin appeared from around the back of the car. I smiled and knelt down to pet my new companion, almost satisfied by the question of how she got into the house being answered, but increasingly wary of the new mystery that unfolded. I mean, she was hardly moving the panel from the garage to the closet by herself. It was then that I saw the man sat in my car. His eyes were a mix of fear and desperation. Mine were clouded by the shock of the intrusion. He opened the door and started to get out, but without exchanging any words, I ran. I knocked on my neighbour's door, begging for help. I asked if I could use his phone to call the police, but he said he had a better idea. He went back inside, returning a second later with a shotgun like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. Without thinking, I followed him back to mine and into the garage. Both the man and the dog were gone. There was trash piled up inside my car, and beer bottles scattered around, some empty, some filled with piss. It was obvious that the man had been living in my car for weeks. That's scary enough as it is, without the thought that he'd been entering my home and helping himself to food and drink from my cupboards while I slept. I did file a police report, but I never got a visit from the cops. My neighbour helped me properly fill the gap in my closet, but he couldn't help fill the hole left by my new friend. It looks like there used to be a door there before the extension was built. After that, I installed ring cameras front and back, and then one night, I got a notification come through at around 3 AM. I opened up the app to see a man walking away from my house. He was back, but gone in an instant. Still, I got out of bed and went down to check that he hadn't found another route in. During my inspection, I heard the faint sound of barking. My eyes widened in excitement as I rushed to open the door. There, tied up against a post, the Springer Spaniel. I looked to the left and to the right, but the man had vanished. I knelt down to hug the dog and noticed a makeshift collar around his neck. A loose cloth collar with a pendant that looked like an old coin sanded smooth. Etched into it in rough writing were the words "Stone Cold." It made me rethink the entire ordeal. Yes, the man had broken into my house, but he was obviously homeless and just wanted to do what was right by his dog. This must have been the hardest thing he's ever had to do, which I guess is why I'm writing this. If by some miracle this message reaches you, I just want you to know Steve Austin is going to have the best life imaginable, and if you need a place to stay, I'm sure we could work something out. I have a garage I'm not using, and after all, it's stone cold outside. Growing up, my sister Claire had a tree outside her window with a branch just long enough to reach it. She'd use it to sneak out, and her boyfriends would use it to sneak in. When she went off to college, I inherited her room. It was twice the size of my old one. The branch from the tree would often tap on the window, which would keep me up on windy nights. It didn't help that it also produced a shadow that haunted my wall like a restless spirit. I kept asking my dad to cut it down, but he'd refuse, saying it adds character to the neighbourhood since there weren't that many trees around. It took me a good 6 months to get used to the sound, but it eventually became like white noise. One night when my parents were out for dinner, the gentle tap seemed a lot more aggressive than usual, like someone was knocking. I tried to ignore it at first, but it started to sound like the window was close to shattering, so I went over to check it out. There was a man in the tree. I froze in terror as a hooded figure sat on the branch, swinging his legs like a child playing. He looked up at me. "I'm looking for Claire," he said in a low rumble. I was actually pretty relieved that it wasn't just some randomer, and I just assumed it was their ex or something, but I couldn't recognize him with his hood up. I didn't open the window, but I shouted over that she doesn't live here anymore. "Oh," he said, "are you alone?" His voice gave me the creeps. It was deep, a kind of guttural howl that sounded like he was putting it on. I told him again in an unwavering tone that Claire had moved out. He looked down at his swinging feet dejectedly. "Okay," he croaked and started to climb down. I watched him from the window as he slunk down the road like a drunk after a few too many beers. After the initial shock, I actually thought it was pretty funny. I didn't tell my parents, but I did call Claire, who seemed excited that someone was still holding a soft spot for her. The next night came, and the tapping started up again. I lay still, hoping that he'd leave, but then I heard a rattle as if he was trying to open the window. "Go away!" I screamed. Almost immediately, my dad burst into the room to see what was going on. I told him about the man in the window and he rushed over to check. Of course, by this time, the man had already disappeared. "It's just the tree," my dad tried to console me in a patronizing manner. It was only then that I told him about the night before, and to cement my story, I told him about all the time Claire's boyfriends had used the tree prior. He was pissed. He didn't call the police though. Instead, he called Claire, and after a furious lecture, he demanded that she call everyone that it could be and threaten them with a lawsuit or worse if they ever come back again. She did the rounds. I don't know who she called or how many boys, but no one would own up to it. For the next few nights, no one came back, or at least I don't think they did. It was hard to shake the feeling that someone could be out there, hiding in the tree, waiting for the right opportunity. My parents were going away at the weekend. I wish they would have cancelled, but it's rare they get any time off, so I wasn't going to push for it. My dad agreed to cut off the branch just to be on the safe side. The first night away was great. I invited a couple of friends over and we stayed up watching scary movies, which might not have been the best choice, but I barely gave it a second thought. I tried to get them to stay for the second night, but they both said they had other things on. The next night I actually had quite a good time by myself. I had my music blaring whilst I finished off my homework and drifted off into dreamland without a care in the world. There was tapping at the window, but the branch was gone, so there couldn't have been any psycho exes outside. Yeah, it took a minute for the light bulb to switch on above my head. The branch was gone, so the branch couldn't be brushing the window either. As soon as I realised, my eyes opened in an instant. I looked up at the wall where the tree's shadow used to roam and instead saw the outline of a man. I could hear him trying to open the window again, only this time there was no one in the house to come to the rescue. I was on my own, but I didn't want him to know that. I tried calling my parents, but they wouldn't pick up. Putting on a brave face, I moved towards the window, coming face to face with the creep. I held up my phone and I took a picture, causing him to turn away momentarily, but then he just carried on trying to pry the window open. I turned the flash on and took a second picture as he tried to cover his face. It seemed to work, so I just kept on taking pictures until he disappeared from my sight. I called the police, and as I waited for them to arrive, I looked through the photos I had taken. His face was clear, but it wasn't anyone I recognised. I sent them to Claire, and she said she'd never seen him before either. The police came and combed the area. They didn't find the guy, but they said he'd left behind a pair of ladders that reached up to my bedroom. They said they'd patrolled the area and that they'd keep a car outside the house, and whilst I did feel safer for a couple of weeks, it was only temporary. I'm not sure if I can ever recover from the whole ordeal. Every night I lie awake, listening out for tapping at the window.